Hi, welcome to the Dynamic Duel Podcast, a weekly show where we review superhero films and debate the superiority between Marvel and DC by comparing their characters in stat-based battle simulations. I'm Marvelous Joe.
And I'm his twin brother, Johnny DC.
And Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to everyone. This episode drops on Christmas Eve, so we hope you're having a fantastic holiday. Time to kick back, relax, and listen to some podcast episodes.
There's no better time of the year to share your favorite podcasts with the ones you love.
Give the gift of podcast recommendations this holiday season.
It's what I'm giving all my family. I'm too cheap.
It's like, oh, you want a gift? Listen to our show. That's the greatest gift you can receive.
It's the gift that keeps giving. 153 episodes.
In this episode, we will be reviewing Watchmen Season 1, which premiered on HBO a few weeks ago and concluded just last week. It was a fantastic show. If you're just the slightest bit of a fan of Watchmen, of the film or of the comic or anything related to that series, this show is near mandatory watching. It's that good.
I love the world building it does. I love the fact that it takes place in the Watchmen universe, just like in modern times right now. Like, what would that world be like in 2019?
Right. We have a lot to say about it. Really looking forward to reviewing it later on this episode. Before that, we're going to break down the comic book movie news from the past week, of which there really wasn't much, but we're going to talk about some tidbits of news that have come out about the various Disney Plus Marvel shows, and we're also going to be discussing the Birds of Prey R rating that it received by the MPAA last week.
As always, feel free to jump around in our episode. Our segment times are in our episode description. Before that, we want to give a quick shout out to DC/Marvel for giving us a review on Apple Podcasts.
Yeah, it means a lot to us. Thank you to everyone who reviews us and rates the show. It goes a long way in helping us grow our audience. With that all out of the way,
quick to the No Prize. So No Prize is an award that Marvel used to give out up until the 90s to fans. Our version, the Dynamic Duel No Prize, is a digital award that we post on social media that I personally draw for those who we feel gave the best answer to our question of the week. Last week's question was, who has been the best cast Marvel or DC hero on television and why? We got a few answers that were from the movies, but this was a television-focused question.
We did get quite a few great answers. First honorable mention goes to Gavin Amai, who said that John Bernthal as the Punisher was the best cast hero because the actor elevated the role with his raw, savage emotion. And I have to agree, John Bernthal is definitely one of my favorite cast heroes for those Marvel Netflix shows, and I really hope they transition him over to the MCU.
I remember being a true, Thomas Jane diehard back when, Ray Stevenson was cast as Punisher in Punisher Warzone. So I was really surprised to find another actor that was able to do better, I thought, than Thomas Jane. John Bernthal is absolutely perfect as the Punisher.
He is by far the best actor to take on the role so far. Yeah.
Honorable mention also goes to Shannon Sanderson and Sana Farhumand, who both gave the answer of Matt Ryan as Constantine, saying that his performance is near perfection and that he's snarky and funny. And I agree. I still have gripes about the cancellation of his show.
But the character is still going strong in animated films and on Legends of Tomorrow, so that's cool.
That's right, and the character just met Lucifer, played by Tom Ellis, who was the answer given by Neil Poling, saying that Tom Ellis is a perfect conflicted devil.
Yeah, that cameo was pretty cool on the Crisis on Infinite Earths crossover event.
I was super surprised when he showed up on screen. I was like, Neil Poling was right, because he chose him as his preferred cameo for the event.
Yeah. Red Hood from Twitter gave the answer of Grant Gustin as the Flash and Stephen Amell as Green Arrow from the CW shows, because both actors brought so much character to their parts.
Yeah, I've always liked Stephen Amell as Oliver Queen, and I still remember when Grant Gustin first made an appearance on Arrow. I was super surprised. I wasn't quite sold as him as Barry Allen, but over the time, his show is just so fantastic, and I think a lot of it has to do with his performance as Barry. Our final honorable mention goes to CJ Kraft, who gave the answers of Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill for their animated voiceovers of Batman and the Joker, respectively. They're just iconic. And like most people, whenever I read the comics, I hear their voices.
Yeah, their voices are what all other Batman and Joker actors are compared against.
Absolutely. Some people have come close, like with the Harley Quinn animated show on DC Universe right now.
Yeah.
But Conroy and Hamill are the gold standard.
But we have two winners of this week's No Prize. The first winner is Richard McGrew, who gave the answer of Lou Ferrigno as the Hulk, saying that he was the only one who could have played the character at the time. And I agree, while the rest of the actors that were mentioned were fantastic for their roles, none suited them quite as well physically as Lou Ferrigno.
Yeah, in a time before like heavy special effects and things like that, when you had to do things practically,
Yeah.
he absolutely was perfect for the role.
He was the Hulk. You would believe that a man could grow green and strong.
The other winner of this week's No Prize goes to Lou613, and this is actually his second week in a row winning the No Prize. And he gave the answer of Tom Welling as Clark Kent. And honestly, I chose this answer purely on a nostalgia basis because I loved Smallville. I still remember watching the first episode and just being enthralled by it. Tom Welling, for the longest time, to me was the perfect Superman. So much so that like I was kind of upset when they cast Brandon Routh as the character for Superman Returns. I was like, just cast Tom Welling. He's perfect. The show did go on for a really long time and kind of got to a point where it was kind of obvious that a almost 30-year-old was still playing a teenager. But I still think it's one of the most successful DC superhero shows that has existed. And I agree with Lou613 when he says that it kind of started the modern era of superhero TV.
It was the first modern superhero television show of real quality. Prior to that, you had shows like Mutant X or The Mantis or weird shit like that just wasn't really taken seriously. To have a show that took the material seriously and paid great fan service was just a real gem in that day and age.
It was just a great origin story, something that like kids my age could really relate to. You know, when Clark Kent was in high school, I was in high school. I think that went a long way.
So congrats again to Richard McGrew and Lou613 for winning this week's No Prize. Great answers, guys. If you, the listener, want to win your own No Prize, go ahead and stay tuned to later on this episode when we'll be asking another question of the week. Now that that's done,
on to the news. So I remember pretty early on when Birds of Prey was first announced, they were talking about it being rated R.
Right, yeah, we've assumed that for a while, but this past week it became official.
Right, the MPAA has officially given Birds of Prey an R rating for strong violence and language throughout and some sexual and drug material.
Sounds about right, judging what we've seen from the trailers.
Now, it has been said in reports of this news that Warner Brothers has been pretty apprehensive about giving this an R rating. And I have to imagine that if it wasn't for the success of The Joker, they probably would have edited it to be PG-13.
How do you feel about the fact that DC is now releasing 2 R-rated superhero-related films back-to-back?
I hope it doesn't become like a major trend. Like all of a sudden, Joker's successful. Now Warner Brothers wants to make all of their films rated R. I mean, Harley Quinn probably should be rated R. I mean, look at her animated cartoon right now. It's definitely TVMA, and I think it's better because of that. That being said, there doesn't need to be an R rating trend, you know, and it would be kind of nice to have, you know, a TVMA version of Harley and one that's more accessible to maybe younger viewers, because Harley Quinn is pretty popular. I know Jim Lee considers her like one of the 4th pillars of DC next to the Trinity. So I'm kind of surprised, honestly, that they decided to go the R-rated route.
It's kind of strange that Suicide Squad was rated PG-13
right?
and Birds of Prey is rated R, because conceptually I would have flipped those.
And James Gunn's upcoming Suicide Squad film is probably going to be rated R.
Right.
I do want some kids to be able to see these films.
Some kids? Like your kids?
Kinda, yeah. You know? They definitely can't see Joker.
Right.
How are they going to grow up loving these DC characters if they can't even see the film in theaters?
Well, that's what DC superhero girls are for, right?
That's absolutely true.
All the people that complain about these like kid-oriented superhero shows like Teen Titans Go need to realize that we need another generation of people who love these characters, and those kiddie shows are the way to reach them.
Right. Yeah, not everything has to be adult-oriented.
Right.
I think my biggest fear coming off of this news is that people are going to assume that the Harley Quinn film is in the same universe as the Joker film, which it's definitely not. With recent set reports, Kathy Ann has even said that it may not even be in the same timeline as Suicide Squad. It's sort of like this alternate timeline.
Ugh.
Yeah, not the most exciting news, for sure. Especially considering the Harley Quinn character, played by Margot Robbie, will be in the next Suicide Squad film.
So confusing. They need to get their shit together. They need an outline. They need direction to really steer a cohesive DC universe.
Another thing that came out of recent set reports is sort of the focus on Harley's perspective for the film. So everything in Gotham is going to be like very bright and colorful, as opposed to, you know, past depictions of Gotham where it's, you know, very dark and gritty.
So she's an unreliable narrator in this film?
It seems to be the case, yeah. And also, because it's coming from her perspective and she's kind of crazy, the story's timeline will also be non-linear.
So really?
Yeah, sort of like a Quentin Tarantino film in a way.
Interesting.
Which, the trailers kind of gave off a Tarantino vibe to begin with. And Kathy Yan has said that he's a big inspiration for her as a filmmaker.
This will be like the Fight Club for female superheroes.
Or Pulp Fiction. Yeah, something like that.
That's pretty cool.
So we have a Scorsese-style Joker, and now we have a Tarantino-style Harley Quinn.
That's a good way to pitch the movie to people who may not be interested in seeing Birds of Prey. And the movie comes out in less than 2 months.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's right.
Yep.
I can't wait for another trailer.
Yeah, we should be getting one within the next few weeks here.
I wonder if we'll get a Red Band trailer, like something like Deadpool.
Probably, now that it's officially R-rated. That'll be cool. And we'll talk about it on this show when it comes out. In other news, we've gotten quite a few tidbits of news regarding the Disney Plus television shows over these past few weeks that individually aren't much, but they add up to something pretty interesting. Just a few weeks ago, we got our first look at the WandaVision show, which looks very much like a Lucy or Dick Van Dyke show. It looks like a black and white 50s sitcom. It looks amazing.
It makes me really intrigued as to the premise of the show. Like, does it all take place in her head? Does it all take place in an alternate reality of her own making?
Yes, I'm pretty sure that's what's going on here. And Kevin Feige has stated himself that she will be becoming the Scarlet Witch that we know and love from the comics by the end of this series. And that Doctor Strange is going to be making an appearance in the show.
That's pretty cool. And it makes sense considering that Scarlet Witch is going to be in the next Doctor Strange film.
Right. Now, the whole series is not going to be shot in this black and white style. Gradually, it's going to grow into more like the MCU as we know it, as her reality starts deteriorating. From that show, we also got a look at Monica Rambeau, who was not wearing her photon outfit, so she's not probably going to be a superhero within this series. But it's cool just to see grown-up Monica on screen. I hope that maybe she does get powers within the course of this show.
I imagine later on we'll see her in the Captain Marvel sequel.
It's possible. In fact, it's entirely likely considering how much of a role she had in the first Captain Marvel movie. I'd like to see her in the Captain Marvel sequel alongside Kamala Khan, Ms. Marvel, which is another Disney Plus show that's going to start production here soon as April, I believe.
Oh, wow.
And then the Captain Marvel movie can kind of be like this kind of a forced film where her arc is to maybe train these additional female superheroes. Now, the head writer for the Ms. Marvel television show is named Bisha K. Ali. She's the writer and the showrunner. We don't have a star for that yet or any additional news. But while that writer has been established for a while, She-Hulk and Moon Knight had their writers announced this past month. The scribe for She-Hulk is going to be Jessica Gao. I'm really excited that it's a female writer to get that perspective for the She-Hulk show, which I hope is going to feel kind of like an Ally McBeal superhero show. But she won an Emmy for her work on Rick and Morty. She was the writer of the Pickle Rick episode.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Nice.
That is super exciting because that was a fantastic episode. Rick and Morty is an amazing, brilliant show. And if we could get even a fraction of that type of brilliance within She-Hulk, it's going to be amazing.
That episode especially, it was very introspective. I think that's probably one of the most important episodes of that series.
Definitely. As far as Moon Knight goes, it was announced recently that a writer named Jeremy Slater will be overseeing that show. And he was the writer of Netflix's Umbrella Academy, which was a popular show on Netflix that was based off of a comic book series written by Gerard Way.
Yeah, my wife really liked that show.
We've heard reports saying that the character Werewolf by Night is going to be making an appearance on that show, which it makes sense considering that the Werewolf by Night was Moon Knight's first villain. And you can learn all about that if you listen to our Batman vs. Moon Knight episode.
All the way back to episode number 2.
And we've also received news that this particular show will be commencing production soon after Ms. Marvel does, but it's going to shoot primarily at Pinewood Studios, which was a renowned film studio.
Yeah, they shot Batman Begins there. I know they've shot some James Bond films there.
Yeah. Which makes me think that the production value of this show is going to be really, really great. I mean, you look at another Disney Plus show like The Mandalorian, which is currently going on, and that entire series was shot on a soundstage. The only location shooting they did was for backdrops, which was entirely impressive.
Jon Favreau is just a master of shooting CG environments. You take a look at Jungle Book, you take a look at The Lion King. It's still unbelievable that those were not shot on location.
Yeah, Pinewood Studio is a great resource.
I mean, how many shows are shot on Pinewood? It's going to be movie caliber, and it's going to be fantastic, I imagine.
The last bit of news regarding the Disney Plus shows is that the What If animated show is going to be longer than the live action shows, which are about 6 episodes each. We don't know how many episodes are going to be in What If yet, But it's going to be more than 6, and they're already working on season 2. Meaning basically they just love the series that they've created so far.
Now, do we know yet if it's going to be like one what if story per episode, or will it span the entire season?
It's going to be one what if story per episode.
Okay.
And it's going to debut in the summer of 2021. But yeah, a lot of stuff to get excited about regarding Disney Plus and those television shows.
And that brings us to our question of the week.
Out of all the Marvel television shows announced for Disney Plus, which are you looking forward to the most and why? Now, these shows include Falcon and the Winter Soldier, WandaVision, Loki, What If, Hawkeye, Ms. Marvel, She-Hulk, and Moon Knight. Out of all of those, which excites you the most?
There's a lot to choose from. There's a lot of great choices there.
Post your answer to our Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, or email us at dynamicduelpodcast@gmail.com. We'll pick our favorite answer and draw that person a Dynamic Duel No Prize that we'll post to social media. In regards to the favorite answer, we're not looking for a specific show in particular, but your reasoning why you're looking forward to that one the most. But I think that does it for all the news for this particular episode. Let's go ahead and get into the main event, where we talk all about the HBO series Watchmen and just how great it was.
Okay, so as we mentioned earlier, last week was the final episode of HBO's Watchmen series, which was run by Damon Lindelof of Lost and Leftovers fame.
Yeah, kudos to him. He really took the spirit of the original comic book series and he really modernized it. This could have easily have been a disaster if he tried to, I guess, carry on the story of the characters that appeared in the original graphic novel, but what he decided to do instead was tell an original story that takes place within the same universe, which I think was the best approach. That way he gets his own amazing story while not shitting all over the original.
In a way, yeah, absolutely. I mean, as a fan of the comic and of the movie, I definitely was interested in seeing those characters pop up, and they did in a big way, later on in the season. But when you compare something like this to Doomsday Clock, which recently also just concluded, like the same week that this show did, it's hard for me to kind of decide which sequel to Watchmen I prefer. If you're not familiar with Doomsday Clock, it's a 12-issue comic series written by Jeff Johns that sort of introduces the Watchmen characters to the DC universe. I definitely think that the HBO television show is more widely accessible. Surprisingly, because you still kind of had to know quite a bit of the Watchmen universe to get the most out of the show. So with that said, if you haven't read the comic and you haven't seen the show, definitely read the comic before you see the show.
Yes.
Because the show has a bunch of spoilers, as will this review.
Right.
So read the comic, then watch the show, then listen to this episode. Right. In that order.
Don't confuse them.
You have a lot of homework to do there.
If you don't have an HBO subscription, I know that the series is available for digital purchase at this point. And I would say that it's definitely worth the money.
It's absolutely worth your money. It's the best TV show I've seen this year, hands down. What made the show so good for me, besides the fan service, is just how smart it is and how relevant it is to this political climate. The comic of Watchmen was very political. It came out in the 80s during the height of the Cold War, and the book delved very heavily into the Cold War and the fears of nuclear holocaust.
Yeah.
Now, Warner Brothers had been courting Damon Lindelof, based on his past body of work, to do something with Watchmen for a while, and he always turned him down. To him, Watchmen was too sacred. And he wrote a really kind of beautiful, in a way, letter to fans at the start of production of this show, kind of explaining how, he had been courting and how he didn't want to do it, but how he eventually came around. He read an article in The Atlantic written by Ta-Nehisi Coates. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation on that. I think he wrote Black Panther for a while, the comic. But it was a case for reparations.
Right, reparations being payments made to African Americans who are descendants of black slaves as compensation for all the injustices that they suffered in the past.
Right, and Coates mentioned in the article the Black Wall Street Massacre of 1921, which is the opening scene of this show.
Right.
I didn't realize it was a true story.
Yeah, I had no idea it was a real thing. The Tulsa, Oklahoma Massacre of 1921. It was super tragic. Hundreds of black people were slaughtered at the hands of the Ku Klux Klan.
And just white residents of Tulsa.
That's insane.
And a lot of the more incredulous things that happened in that opening scene, like the firebombing from the planes, that actually happened as well.
That's nuts. It's crazy.
So it's not something that a lot of people know about. Again, I didn't know about this in the same way that I didn't know the Doomsday Clock was a real thing until I learned about it from the Watchmen comic. Damon Lindelof did a lot of research about this event and decided that he wanted to tell a story about it.
Right, because racism is still topical. It still happens today and is very much part of the current political climate.
It's sort of the political turmoil of the time, in the same way, again, that nuclear holocaust was of the 80s. So when Lindelof learned about this event that happened in 1921, he decided to incorporate and inject this historical fact within this universe that was set up by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons. And while Alan Moore has pretty much removed himself from all things Watchmen related, Dave Gibbons actually was a part of this show behind the scenes.
Good riddance to Alan Moore. Like, whatever.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, he's a brilliant writer and stuff. Some of his stuff is brilliant. I've read some of his other work that I just couldn't finish.
You're going to get cursed because he said that.
Who cares? He's dumb.
Damon Lindelof has said that he feels like he's been cursed by Alan Moore.
Really?
For the work he's done on the show, yeah.
Oh, jeez. But I like how Lindelof has kind of reimagined Watchmen as a sort of platform to address current political topics within the realm of the superhero universe. That's kind of what it is now.
And the fact that he was able to make it entertaining and not preachy,
right?
More power to him.
Yeah, yeah.
The world that he sets up here, again, is just awesome. It totally feels like it's Watchmen 2019. You know, the world is more advanced in some ways. They have like electric vehicles everywhere.
Yeah.
And they have like owl ships and stuff like that for the police. But they also don't have like the internet. And they don't have smartphones. And one of the more interesting things about this show, I think, is that in the same way that the comic had all of this supplemental material that came with each issue, in the back of each issue, this whole television show came with its own supplemental website called PDpedia.
What? It did?
Yeah.
I did not even look at that.
There's a lot of content on there. It's basically a bunch of PDF files. I haven't gone through all of them, but the stuff that you do find out through there is pretty interesting.
Like what?
Like you learn that Lube Man. Do you remember him?
Oh, that's right.
That kind of thing that went nowhere?
Yeah, I almost completely forgot about that.
That was Dale Petey, the rookie FBI agent that Lori Blake brought with her to Tulsa.
What?
Yes. And he's the one who kind of assembled all of the supplemental information that you find on PDpedia. That's why it's called that.
Hey. Oh, that's fucking awesome.
You also learn sort of like why there is no internet or smartphones in this world. And it's because a lot of people suspected that the alien invasion, the hoax that happened at the end of the Watchmen comic, was brought about because the aliens were interested in our technology. So, like, there's this huge regulation around technology in the world governments.
Interesting. You know, honestly, the lack of internet and smartphone technology didn't even register with me as I was watching the show.
Yeah, like Angela, when she goes to answer the phone, she's still like tethered to the wall when she does it. Like no one has any kind of mobile device. In this world, we also have squid showers, which of course is an homage to what happened at the end of the Watchmen comic and kind of keeps the world on its toes in a sense. It keeps the peace.
It was an interesting mystery as to why baby squids were still falling from the sky.
And I figured it was Adrian, but then again, during the Adrian Veidt scenes, you didn't see him involved with that in any way for a long period of time.
Right, right.
There were some things in the show that they tried to make sort of like the structure of the Watchmen comic with like supplemental material and like American hero story.
Yeah.
I didn't really think that was necessary.
Well, I like how American Hero Story, it was almost like a parody, I think. Like they were showing the approach that they could have taken to a Watchmen series that they just didn't go with. And I much prefer the show that we got as opposed to the American Hero Story show that we could have gotten.
And it's kind of interesting because besides Dr. Manhattan, that's the only real hero obsession you see in this universe. You know, they're not obsessed with superheroes sort of in the same way that we are with our movies and stuff like that.
Right.
They're more about pirates and stuff like that in that universe. It was kind of unique to see, I guess, how American Hero Story didn't play as big of a role as I thought it would in the show. There were a lot of things that kind of I felt kind of got dropped off. And I sort of think that's what prevents this from being a perfect show. But it still comes really close.
Oh, yeah. I was pleasantly surprised with how good this show was, considering my expectations of it were not very great.
Well, you've never been the biggest Watchmen fan.
Yeah, it's all right.
Dude.
It's all right.
Dude.
What?
It is the greatest graphic novel of all time.
No, it's just all right.
The greatest.
It's okay. Like, I remember when we were watching trailers for the show, they confused me a lot because I didn't understand the setting. I didn't understand the characters that we were seeing. I wanted to see more of the characters from the comic book. And I think one of the things that surprised me the most was we actually did get a lot of Dr. Manhattan, a lot of Silk Spectre, a lot of Ozymandias.
Yeah, really the only character we didn't get that was still alive at the end of Watchmen was Night Owl.
Right. Yeah, what happened to Dryberg?
He and Laurie were both imprisoned for their vigilante activities after the Watchmen comic.
Okay.
Laurie actually became the comedian, like a female comedian.
What? Really?
After the Watchmen comic, they did the vigilante superhero thing for a while. They were caught in prison. She cut a deal and became a part of the anti-vigilante FBI task force.
Okay, so Dryberg is still in prison?
It's assumed. They didn't mention it too much in the PDpedia.
I assumed that he would cut a deal to give the police his schematics for his Night Owl vehicle, though.
No, I think they just took those.
Oh.
It's kind of mentioned that as the comedian, Laurie kind of became disillusioned with vigilantism.
Okay.
After a while, like, it all just became one big joke. That was kind of alluded to in her episode 3, which I kind of consider to be her episode.
Yeah.
When she's telling a joke to Dr. Manhattan through the telephone booth, that sort of sets up the frame for the episode. That's kind of an allusion to her career as a comedian.
I didn't even catch that. There are some brilliant little touches within this show that I guess are easy to miss. It almost warrants rewatching.
Well, I mean, did you even notice that, like, she's going by Laurie Blake now?
Yeah.
Instead of Laurie Uspechik.
Yeah.
If you've seen the show, but if you haven't read the PDpedia, you're not experiencing the full show, and I'm still reading through it.
Yeah,
honestly.
I gotta check that out now.
I remember from the trailers, just like setting up my expectations for the show, I was really confused as to why it was taking place in Tulsa.
Yeah, that was really confusing. But now with the context of the massacre that happened and how that informs the events that occur in the show, it totally makes sense.
Yeah, I thought one of the interesting bit of world building they did for the show was the fact that, yes, Rorschach's journal was published at the end, but only like far-right conspiracy theorists sort of ran with it and believed it.
Right, right.
And that sort of inspired the whole 7th Cavalry evolution of the Ku Klux Klan.
And it was also an evolution of the Cyclops organization. It was kind of like Hydra to the Nazi Party.
Exactly.
Seems like how they explained it in Captain America, the First Avenger.
Right, right.
Where Cyclops was kind of out there with a greater agenda, looking into like hypnotism and stuff, which I think was a reference to Moloch, who was kind of like this hypnotist villain from the comics.
Right, right, yeah. And, you know, the fact that they adopted the Rorschach identity isn't too much of a stretch. As much as, like, I really like the character of Rorschach, I could see, you know, him being a very conservative right-wing character.
Well, he was in the book.
Right,
He was a fundamentalist.
Exactly. So, yeah, it's not surprising that they would adopt his identity.
I wonder how that would make the original Rorschach feel. I feel like he would kick all their asses.
I think he would kill all of them, for sure. Now, we know that the U.S. was victorious in the Vietnam War in the comic, but we get to see it here in this show as the 51st state.
Right. Yeah, that was interesting.
And it's a great backstory for the history of Angela, which I think we'll get into.
Yeah, let's get into the character breakdown.
So the character of Angela Abar, a.k.a. Sister Night,
yeah, I love that,
was played by Regina King, coming off of her Oscar win for Best Supporting Actress for If Beale Street Could Talk. And she is such a badass in this role.
She really is.
The action in this show, especially like in the opening episodes, I was totally sold from the action alone.
Yeah, I wasn't sure how she would handle the role, but I just loved her character. I like how she got the idea for her superhero persona from a 70s blaxploitation film that she found as a kid.
Yeah, and it was nice that it was like involved in the trauma of her parents' death in Vietnam from a suicide bomber.
Right.
You know, because Laurie says, like in episode 3, that, you know, vigilantism sort of stems from traumatic experiences, usually as a child.
Right. And in Angela's case, that was totally the case.
The outfit was pretty cool, like a hooded nun.
Yeah, with the habit and everything.
Yeah,
I liked it. Just the concept of how heroes are approached in Tulsa with the whole White Night event where a lot of cops were killed, and then police officers started wearing masks to hide their identities. And they kind of had secret identities given that their roles as police officers were now top secret.
Yeah, that was fascinating.
And this act where cops were allowed to wear masks allowed for the presence of more extreme masked heroes that worked within the law enforcement system.
And it was one more reason why it made sense to put this in Tulsa, because that wasn't happening across the U.S. That was just happening in Tulsa.
Right.
So you go where the superheroes are, essentially.
And that aspect of the show, hiding the policemen's identities, was also topical because that turned out to be a whole plot by the 7th Cavalry and Cyclops, in that they wanted police to hide their identities so that they can, get away with this police brutality shit. Although they were actively working against the administration's policies, Robert Redford's policies, who is the president in the show, of like gun control and things like that, where they had to, unlock their guns. So the whole plot of the bad guys of this film was to get political power and also, get Dr. Manhattan's power.
Just cause turmoil, essentially.
Yeah.
It's no surprise, really, that Angela became such an effective vigilante and so good at her job, considering all of the traumatic events that happened in her life, with her parents dying, with White Knight,
and with her superhero lineage,
Yeah, she's the granddaughter of Hooded Justice.
That was a huge reveal, and one that really made me love this show. Hooded Justice, who was really just a tertiary character in the original comics, had such a major role in this show. Not only because he was the starring character of American Hero Story, where they got him all wrong.
Right.
But because he was the grandfather of Angela Abar.
She's a legacy character in the same way that Dan Dreiberg's Night Owl was to Hollis Mason.
Right.
In the comic.
So that really endeared the character of Sister Night to me.
How could Alan Moore not like that?
Yeah.
The granddaughter of Hooded Justice, who had such a huge air of mystery in the comic, on purpose.
Right.
They took that mystery and ran with it. How could he not love the fact that his granddaughter was also a hooded, costumed crime fighter?
It made this character, who was seemingly irrelevant to the Watchmen universe in general, a key figure of this whole mythos. It was awesome.
It also doesn't hurt that, she fell in love with Dr. Manhattan.
Yeah, because he fell in love with her.
Which also was a huge surprise.
Yeah.
This whole show really revolves around Angela. All of the characters from the old Watchmen comic, it's surprising how they found different ways to have them interact with Angela.
Right.
Really good writing.
It's brilliant, honestly. I couldn't have come up with this.
No, and I think that's why I love it so much, is because it wasn't just fan service. It was something completely new. It was something completely cool.
Yeah, it reminded me of the show Legion, which I thought was amazing, in that you have a writer of a show that is enamored with the comics, knows the comics, and doesn't decide to just retell what came before, but go in a completely different direction and show us something new.
It's what the Joker film benefited from, I think.
Yeah. We're getting these original hot takes that are simultaneously faithful and innovative.
And it's nice that it's something that sort of everyone can enjoy. Everyone is experiencing it for the first time.
Yeah.
It's not retelling the comic.
Right. I don't go into the theater already knowing what's going to happen because I've already read the comic series that it's been based off of.
Like was the case for Watchmen, for Zack Snyder's Watchmen, which I still really like that film. It's probably one of my top 3 most favorite DC films, or films in general. But there's something to be said for original work as well.
Yeah.
Really, Angela's whole arc in the show, I think, involves helping bring justice for the Black Wall Street massacre. She got tangled up in the whole plan to enact justice on Cyclops by the very nature of who she is and who she associates with, like Dr. Manhattan.
Right.
Dr. Manhattan, of course, his real name is Jonathan Osterman. We get to see him as a little boy in the show. But for a majority of the series, he goes by Calvin Abar. He's disguised as that character, who's played by Yahya Abdul-Mateen II, who was Black Manta in the Aquaman movie.
Yeah, that was cool to see Black Manta in this show. Not as Black Manta, but the actor. I'm a big fan of Yahya.
I guess he didn't actually know he was cast as Dr. Manhattan until they started filming the 3rd episode of the series. Because they filmed it chronologically, I guess.
Okay.
Right when he found out, I guess he immediately hired a personal trainer because he knew he was going to have to get naked.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. I kind of feel like that's a cruel thing to not tell someone. I love his surprise reveal in this show. Yeah. I love how they carried on his story from Watchmen. It was so true to the character of Dr. Manhattan from the comic.
Yeah. From that book, he went to Europa, created life, but got kind of bored with it, considering that the inhabitants he created saw him as God and were just there to serve his every whim.
Right.
He initially left Earth because it was too complicated, but he ended up coming back in appreciation of the complications of human life.
Yeah, this is sort of like a reversal of what they did with Doomsday Clock. In Doomsday Clock, like Dr. Manhattan went around and just became more and more apathetic, affecting universal timelines and stuff like that. And it wasn't until Superman sort of inspired him to regain his hope I guess, in humanity.
Yeah.
That he became something more than just like this apathetic god being.
Yeah.
In this show, that sort of happens naturally through Angela, him already knowing that he's going to be in love with her, that he's going to fall in love again.
Yeah. And, you could get away with that because he can see his entire timeline. So the moment where he falls in love with her actually happens well into their relationship, but because he knows that, he loves her from the beginning. It's a strange paradox.
It's a chicken and egg thing,
Right.
like they mentioned in the show.
Yeah.
The way that they had him forget that he's Dr. Manhattan, the device they used to shield his perception of time,
Yeah.
I thought it made sense story-wise. The fact that Adrian would be the one to create something like this, considering the fact that Adrian has successfully killed Dr. Manhattan in the past.
Yeah, for like a few seconds.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. And actually him getting blown up in Karnak in the comic books was actually Adrian's plan B.
Yeah.
That was interesting.
Yeah, that was funny. Ultimately, Dr. Manhattan's whole involvement with the show is one in which he knows he's gonna die. He has this 10-year span of time that he can't see. He just knows that Angela's there before and after.
Yeah.
And he wants to make sure that if his powers are succeeded to someone else, it's not by someone who would abuse it, which I think he thinks that Lady True would do.
Right. Yeah. Well, obviously.
The lady is a megalomaniac.
Yeah. I think it was fascinating how the script nailed Dr. Manhattan's voice. Performance-wise, I still prefer Billy Crudup's from Zack Snyder's Watchmen film.
Yeah.
But they nailed the voice for Yaya. He's a great actor.
One more character from the comic that I thought they did justice to was Ozymandias,
Yes.
Adrian Veidt.
Yeah.
Jeremy Irons is just brilliant in the role.
And we see him kind of watch over society and the peace that he created and how it's slowly starting to fade again. He's disillusioned and kind of frustrated with humanity in general.
And also the fact that, like, no one is worshiping him. He saved humanity, but
No one can ever know.
no one can ever know. Exactly.
Right.
He's not satisfied with the secret hoax that he performed 20 years ago. There's no adoration like there was for Alexander the Great,
Right.
who he's based his whole life on.
Yeah. And no legacy like that figure.
I think he kind of realizes that he's just going to be forgotten.
Yeah. I'll admit I was rather frustrated with most of his story during the course of this show because the mystery of his location with the manor and with his servants and everything like that, it just didn't make sense to me.
It draws on for a while.
It does.
But you learn at the very last episode that the timeline of his story doesn't even coincide with the rest of the show.
Right. It's non-linear. I guess he was on Europa for about 5 years before he was rescued by Lady True and encased in gold.
Yeah, so like every episode when you see him get like a new anniversary cake, that's like a year apart from each other.
Yeah, fascinating. Earth year, I'm assuming.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that he kind of comes to the same realization that Dr. Manhattan does, in that having people worship you is kind of boring.
Yeah. And he tried to create like a nemesis for himself with the game warden.
Yeah.
And like he gave one of the clone servants like a mask and everything and told him to like try his very best to prevent him from escaping Europa. And in the end, the game warden was like, was I a worthy adversary? And Adrian was like, no.
That was so heartbreaking.
Yeah.
And the fact that was the very first Mr. Phillips.
Yeah.
He was sort of like the Adam of the Phillips.
Right.
That hurt even a little bit more because you just see him die just completely like heartbroken.
Poor guy. I do feel bad for those clones.
Yeah. The way that Adrian was able to escape from Europa was just fucking brilliant.
It was.
I loved that. You had no idea what's going on, but in hindsight, it all makes perfect sense. It's so great.
The payoff was definitely worth it, for as frustrating as his whole arc was. And when he finally got back to Earth in that last episode, his character finally had a purpose again.
Yeah.
And it was really fun to watch him.
I loved the relationships he had with everyone he interacted with. He's just so, like, egotistical.
Yeah.
It's funny. It's hilarious. He played it to great comedic effect for a character who was never really comedic.
Right.
Just the absurdity of it just
Of the
makes
situation.
It just makes it funny. What's kind of ironic in this whole thing is that after he's rescued by his daughter, Lady True, he's sort of responsible for saving humanity once again, potentially with squid.
The squid, man.
He does it twice. But of course, by the end, he's finally brought to justice.
I have to say that the way this show treated the original squid monster that Ozymandias teleported into Manhattan and, the subsequent psychic blast, that was just horrifying. It also showed me that it is the better approach to take as opposed to what Zack Snyder did in the Watchmen film.
Oh, I agree.
I think a lot of people were okay with Zack Snyder's take on that disaster because they assumed that a giant psychic squid being teleported into Manhattan would be too ridiculous. But when we actually see that fucking squid, it is a nightmare, absolute nightmare of a situation. It's
horrifying. Like something Lovecraftian, like something like Cthulhu.
Yes.
And it just makes you despise Adrian even more. Like seeing it not just in like a 4-color panel, but seeing it sort of like fully realized in a photorealistic form.
Yeah.
It just makes you understand how evil Adrian is.
Yeah.
I do really like the fact that Adrian was brought to justice at the end of the show.
Yeah.
But,
finally.
yeah. I mean, there's potentially a season 2 coming, not with Damon Lindelof, but who knows if he stays in prison. It's Ozymandias. I doubt he will.
Right. And I like how he was brought to justice by 1, Silk Spectre, and 2, a victim of the Manhattan attack.
Yeah, very appropriate. I loved Jean Smart as Laurie Blake. It wasn't a direction I thought the character would take.
Yeah.
She was on the run from being a vigilante and on the run from Ozymandias and stuff like that. Why would she put herself in such a, I guess, high public position?
Right.
But when you understand the backstory of what she went through, being imprisoned and stuff like that, then it makes sense.
Right. And she was smart in this show. She was a great detective. She figured everything out, basically, to her own detriment, of course.
Yeah.
But I was a big fan of her character. She was like 2 steps ahead of everyone else.
Yeah. And it made sense that for her character, she would be kind of uncomfortable with police as costumed vigilantes because she used to be one. The police used to be her enemy.
Yeah.
Especially after she left John and her government role as being John's lover, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
But, she was with the government then, she's with the government now, and the fact that she, again, became disillusioned with costumed vigilantism, again, makes sense why she wouldn't like the mask wearing of the Tulsa police force. She did come across as kind of weirdly confrontational, especially when she kind of stupidly approached Judd's wife with news that, he was a white supremacist.
Yeah. And kind of like revealed her whole theory to her, which, if it was correct, obviously she was in trouble and that's what happened.
But I guess it kind of makes sense also for the character, given her status as a legacy sort of superhero. I love the callbacks to the comic that they had for her. Like the fact that she was still very pretty much obsessed with being Dr. Manhattan's lover.
Yeah. Well, she had like this magazine and a blue dildo and
a giant blue vibrator.
Yeah, that was fucking huge. So much so that I almost did not know what that was when she first pulled it out. I was like, there's no way. It's like a 2 feet long. What's happening?
It's kind of funny because I guess in Peteypedia, we learned that Dan designed that for her.
What?
Yeah, and he named it the Excalibur, which actually was foreshadowing to Cal being Dr. Manhattan, and that it's her ex, and his name is Cal Abar.
Oh, holy shit.
So many tie-ins you didn't even know were there.
That's pretty clever.
It's hilarious.
Yeah. So I'm assuming there that Night Owl became impotent again.
Or once you go Dr. Manhattan, you don't go back. And he was just cool with the whole thing, I guess.
Yeah.
It was kind of weird to see her end up as like a damsel in distress kind of role towards the end.
Yeah.
But again, I think she made up for it by being one of the ones to bring Adrian to justice.
Yes.
2 more side characters I want to talk about real quick. Lady True was played by Hong Chow. She, of course, was the illegitimate, like, test tube baby of Adrian, who apparently is just as smart as him,
If not smarter, she did outfox him.
Sort of. In the end, not really, though.
Oh, that's true, yeah.
She kind of just wanted to prove herself to him. She had the same superiority complex that he had and these delusions of grandeur where she could save the world and kill the most dangerous racists at the same time. Mm-hmm. I thought Hong Chow did a great job with her character. I really came to like Lady True as the series progressed.
I did. Yeah, at first I didn't know what to make of her, and then I came to really like her. So I was kind of sad to see her go. But I totally understand why it was necessary. In the end, she kind of became this likable antagonist in the same way that Adrian did.
Oh, absolutely. She benefited from a really good setup of her character with that farmhouse couple, where she was just like, I know everything about you. You guys want a baby? Here's a baby. And also all this money. You have 10 seconds. It's like, what a badass.
Now, that thing that fell from space, I'm assuming, was Adrian's craft?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
That's right.
And the reason she wanted to build the Millennium Tower where she did was because she was contacted by Hooded Justice prior to that, where he told her that Tulsa was where Dr. Manhattan was going to be.
Exactly. Again, it's a chicken and egg kind of thing. It's mind-blowing. It's a paradox. Speaking of Will Reeves, a.k.a. Hooded Justice,
He was my favorite character in this show.
He absolutely was. He was played by Louis Gossett Jr.
Which is nuts. He was almost unrecognizable. Like, I haven't seen Louis Gossett Jr. in something in a really long time. He's getting old. And this is not the first superhero thing that he was in, because he was in the 89 Punisher movie with Dolph Lundgren.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Hovind Adepo played the younger version of him. And that's where we got to see like him in black and white becoming Hooded Justice.
That was so good. That was so good.
And of course, we're introduced to the character when he's just a little boy, when he's a victim of what's considered to be the single worst incident of racial violence in American history. Single incident. It's kind of cool how they made Hooded Justice sort of like this Superman figure, this Moses kind of figure, and that he's put in this container and sort of shipped away by his parents for safety.
Yeah, to escape the massacre. And then he moves to New York, becomes a police officer, and is lynched nearly almost to death. And that is the origin of Hooded Justice, mask, and noose.
So fucking brilliant.
Oh my God. Like, Alan Moore couldn't have thought of that.
Right? Right? It's like, there's no way that all those things could have fit together so perfectly. The fact that he's wearing a noose around his neck. The fact that he's wearing like this mask that's sort of like a lynching hood. You know?
Yeah, which is often confused for like an executioner's mask, which they address in the American Hero Story show. It's kind of funny now to think of Zack Snyder's film where they gave Hooded Justice like this German accent or something like that.
Yeah.
And now we know this whole time that he's been a black man who wore like white makeup around his eyes.
Well, in the comic, it was speculated that Hooded Justice, the very first superhero, was like this German wrestler. So I could see how Zack Snyder ran with that. But this origin is just so much better.
It is. Oh my God. It might just be like the best superhero origin of all time, honestly. Where he's like so just in shock of how he just nearly died at the hands of these racist officers after trying to enact justice. And then, you know, he's just angry. And on his walk home from this traumatic incident, he sees this couple getting mobbed and he just snaps.
He acts. Yeah.
Yeah. So good. That is a great superhero origin for modern day storytelling.
For sure.
One that necessarily probably wouldn't have even been formulated 10, 20 years ago, just because of the subject matter involved.
Right.
And now I think now that people seem to be a little bit more empathetic when it comes to matters of race, you really feel his anger as he's going through it.
Hovind Adepo gave such a good performance during that episode. That's my favorite episode. It was episode 6 during this whole backstory.
Yeah. Give that guy an Emmy.
Seriously.
Give that episode an Emmy.
Absolutely. I love the fact that they added so much to the Hooded Justice mythos, that they gave him like this evil organization to combat.
Yeah.
One that was integral to this series all the way up until 2019 when he finally gets justice for what happened to his parents, for what happened to the town, for what happened to his people.
Yes.
It's awesome.
It was amazing.
Everything really with the whole show really goes back to the opening scene of the season, episode 1, which of course starts off with the Black Wall Street Massacre of 1921. That scene, of course, is followed up in modern day 2019, where a Tulsa police officer is killed by a member of the 7th Cavalry, who had sort of been in hiding up until this point.
Yeah.
The cavalry takes credit for the killing. That, of course, results in Detective Angela Abar capturing a 7th Cavalry member. They get a cattle ranch location from him where other cavalry members are. There's this shootout that happens, and the cavalry members take cyanide capsules when they're captured, and a few are shot down from the airplane escape by the police Captain Judd's Night Owl-like ship.
And at the end of that episode, Judd is hanged by this old man in a wheelchair, and we're not sure why. We assume that Judd is a hero for what he did against the cavalry.
Right.
It turns out that he's actually part of a larger, vast conspiracy.
And we are clued into the guy in the wheelchair at the foot of the tree underneath Judd is the little boy that we saw at the beginning, because he's holding the same kind of paper note.
Right, yeah. Great mystery setup for the first episode.
That being said, it sort of, I think, in my opinion, was the weakest episode.
Yeah, well, because it raised a lot of questions without giving a lot of answers, and therefore was just more confusing, I think.
Yeah.
It was hard to know where anything was going.
The show did have the strongest debut performance of any HBO show in history.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
We also get to see Adrian for the first time in this episode.
Yeah, I mean, Adrian's story arc doesn't really gain any relevance until midway through the season.
Yeah. The first episode was called It's Summer and We're Running Out of Ice, and that was a lyric from the song Poor Judd is Dade from the music...
Dade?
Dade. It's like an accent from the musical Oklahoma, which featured in this episode and is really a big clue that, hey, Judd is not going to survive this episode.
Huh.
The next episode is called Martial Feats of Comanche Horsemanship, which I guess is a play on the painting title Comanche Feats of Horsemanship, which can be seen in Judd's mansion. It's kind of seen as like a racist kind of painting, which is kind of a clue.
Okay.
In this episode, Angela meets Will, and she takes him back to like her secret headquarters, which is like an up-and-coming bakery that hasn't been open for a year yet. Will reveals to Angela that he's her grandfather, which a DNA test later confirms. And he warns to Angela that Judd had skeletons in his closet. Literally. Angela goes to his closet and she finds the KKK robe. When Angela tries to take Will to the police station, he's carried off away in her car by a giant electromagnet, which was really weird when it happened.
Yeah. And as we know now, it was Lady True that rescued him.
Yeah. The third episode was called She Was Killed by Space Junk, which is a lyric from the song Space Junk by Devo, which Lori is listening to in her apartment when Senator Keene Jr. shows up. And she's feeding her owl. That was cool. I love that she had the owl.
I love that Senator Keene was the bad guy in this.
Right? His father was responsible for outlawing vigilantism in the comic.
Right, yeah.
Again, this whole episode is sort of framed by a brick joke that Lori tells Dr. Manhattan in a phone booth about Night Owl, Ozymandias, and Dr. Manhattan. That's really the only reference we get to Night Owl besides the owl ship. We learned that Lori's a member of the Anti-Vigilante Task Force, and she's being sent to Tulsa because of all the masked killings that are going on.
Right. Which was a huge mistake on behalf of Keene.
Still don't understand why he did that.
I guess as a way to show that he had nothing to hide, but it was a miscalculation on his part for sure.
He did kind of get some joy at the end of having Lori kind of tied to that chair, witnessing everything that was going on, with her former lover, Dr. Manhattan.
Yeah.
Episode 5 is called If You Don't Like My Story, Write Your Own, which is a quote from Things Fall Apart, a book written by Chinua Achebe, which I actually read in high school. It's a powerful book.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And that's a book that Calvin was reading in his home during this episode. This episode, of course, was the introduction to Lady True. Angela learns more about her grandfather from that Heritage Center, which was pretty cool. Nice display of the technology on hand.
Yeah, that was cool. It was like 23andMe meets an ATM.
When she leaves the Heritage Center, she finds her car, which was dropped at the end of the last episode, like right in front of Lori as she was walking away from the phone booth. In the car, Angela finds the pill bottle of nostalgia, which she later learns is nostalgia, through Looking Glass.
And that's a callback to the comic book series where nostalgia was, I guess, like a perfume.
Yes.
Created by Adrian Veidt. But then Lady True turned it into a memory pill, basically a pill that could store memories and be used by the elderly to relive those experiences.
Which kind of threw me because when they were talking about nostalgia, I knew it as a perfume.
Right.
So the fact that they turned it into something different was interesting. But I guess that's a nice callback to the comic.
Yeah.
Lori gives Angela a lead on Lady True since her company has electromagnetic drone technology. And Lady True asks Angela in Vietnamese if she found her grandfather's pills, kind of cluing her in onto those that they're important.
Yeah. And that was kind of like a brilliant detail that the writers incorporated into the show where you had the Vietnamese working for Veidt in the comic.
Yeah.
And then Vietnam becoming a state and Angela growing up there. And so they were able to communicate through Vietnamese. It was just like a coincidence, I guess.
So many puzzle pieces that fit together so perfectly.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
One thing I didn't mention is that Damon Lindelof, for this show, made sure that his writing staff was half black and half women.
That's cool. Yeah, I like that. The story is so diverse, so it's great to have a writing team that's so diverse.
After Angela meets Lady True, it's revealed that Lady True and Will are working together, which was just another mystery that was kind of there for a while.
Yeah.
The next episode is called Little Fear of Lightning, which is a quote from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne. The full quote is, "If there were no thunder, men would have little fear of lightning," which I think speaks to the theme of this episode, which really is fear. This episode really is Looking Glass's episode.
Yeah, we didn't get to him in the character description, but he was a great central figure in this series. I really liked Tim Blake Nelson's performance in this. And his origin was horrifying.
It was another great origin story. The fact that he was just so traumatized by the giant alien squid attack. And it makes perfect sense why he would have adopted the mirror identity.
Yeah, because I guess in this universe, reflective surfaces repel psychic emanations. And he was able to survive the squid attack because he was in a house of mirrors at a carnival when the squid arrived.
Yeah, he was a young Jehovah's Witness missionary in 1985 in New Jersey. And that was a pretty heartbreaking situation that he was put in.
Where the girl from the Top Knot gang tricked him into thinking that she wanted to have sex with him, which kind of caused him to betray his ideals.
It was just so traumatic. So traumatic to the very core of him.
Yeah.
Walking out and seeing everyone dead. Ugh, I can't imagine. In the present, of course, Wade learns from Lori that she's bugged his work desk, and she overheard him and Angela talking about her grandfather's pills, which Wade, again, helps Angela learn is nostalgia, which, again, is illegal. He heads up a PTSD support group and is unknowingly lured to a 7th Cavalry base, where he learns that not only is Senator Joe Keane Jr. a member of the Cavalry, but that the squid alien attack from the 80s was manufactured by Adrian Veidt.
Yeah, and it flips his entire world upside down.
Completely. He gets Angela to confess that she knows her grandfather killed Judd in the police force, at which point Angela is about to be taken into custody and she just downs the whole bottle of nostalgia. And the episode ends with Wade returning home and 7th Cavalry members showing up at his house.
I really like how capable Looking Glass is as a character. Like, not only is he like this brilliant, observant mind,
which he uses in market research and for the police force.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. And he can handle himself physically, as we learned at the end of that episode when he's turned out to still be alive.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Adrian successfully manages to send a message to his daughter by spelling out the word "save me" with the bodies of Phillips and Crookshanks on the surface of Europa. Next episode is called This Extraordinary Being, which is a quote from the fictional Under the Hood book written by Hollis Mason from the original Watchmen comic. This episode, as I mentioned before, is my favorite. Angela slips into a dangerous lucid state after taking her grandfather's nostalgia, and she starts getting Will's memories of being back on the Black Wall Street Massacre and, being a young cop in New York City and becoming Hooded Justice. It's just a brilliant episode.
Yeah, I like how they addressed how anger caused Will to turn into Hooded Justice. But later on, when he's speaking with Angela, he addresses the fact that it wasn't necessarily anger that he felt when he put on the mask, but more fear.
Yeah.
That was a great point. Like, anger is largely a manifestation of feelings of fear.
Right. And Angela experienced all of it to her detriment. Like, they're trying to save her during this whole episode.
Yeah, because she was losing her identity, basically.
By the end, Angela is saved from losing her mind completely by Lady True. She is in the Millennium Clock Tower. This is the only episode to not have Adrian Veidt in it. Episode 7 is called An Almost Religious Awe, which is a quote from the Watchmen comic by Alan Moore, delivered by Dr. Manhattan when he's talking about how the Vietnamese surrendered to him.
And this was Angela's backstory, this was actually my second favorite episode.
Yeah, she starts to get her own memories back again, including the death of her parents and her grandmother, and just growing up in Vietnam.
It was really cool to see that the actress that played young Angela was the same actress that was in the Shazam film.
Yeah, that was cool.
Her story was just so tragic. Like, when her parents died, that was bad enough. But then when her grandma came to get her, and then right as she was packing her bags to go into the car to come back to America, she falls down due to a heart attack.
So heartbreaking.
Yeah, poor kid.
As Angela is escaping the Millennium Clock building, Lady True reveals that she knows the 7th Cavalry's plan to capture the power of Dr. Manhattan, and she knows that he's not on Mars but is disguised as a man here on Earth. And that's when we learn, when Angela returns to Calvin, that Calvin is Dr. Manhattan. This is also the episode where Lori, she overheard all of the ramblings that was going on while Angela was in her lucid dreaming state. So she goes to Judd's wife and she gets captured. Episode 8 is the penultimate episode. This is probably my second favorite episode. It's called A God Walks into a Bar.
Pretty good play on words.
The whole episode kind of jumps through time, but essentially it's Dr. Manhattan trying to convince Angela to have dinner with him because he tells her that he's Dr. Manhattan and that they're going to fall in love. It fills in a lot of gaps in the mystery of the show.
Yes, yeah, a lot of questions were answered here.
We learn where Adrian is and how that came to be on Europa.
We learn how Dr. Manhattan became Cal.
And why he doesn't remember anything. It all leads up to a moment in 2019 when Angela and Cal are about to be attacked by the 7th Cavalry in their home. And Angela goes out like a badass, just killing a whole bunch of cavalry members. Dr. Manhattan kills the rest, but in the end, it proves futile as he's blasted and captured by a tachyon cannon. The last episode is called See How They Fly, which is a lyric from I Am the Walrus by the Beatles, which is played at the very end of the episode. It's an allusion to the egg that Angela eats and sort of the unknown mystery of what's going to happen next.
Yeah, the egg that houses Dr. Manhattan's powers.
Potentially. At the beginning of this last episode, there's a little bit more of the mystery filled in as Lady True meets Adrian for the first time. And she reveals that she knew that not only was he the perpetrator of the giant alien squid hoax that saved the world, but also that Dr. Manhattan is on Europa.
Yeah, and she reveals her plan to take his powers.
And truly save the world, in her eyes. We get to see Adrian escape from Europa, which was a great scene. I love the way they played with time during that scene as well.
Yeah.
And when he finally awakes on Earth by Lady True, a quantum centrifuge detaches from the Millennium Clock and levitates toward the Greenwood district of Tulsa, where Lady True's employees are like setting up this equipment. At the Cyclops headquarters, white politicians show up just in time for the capture of Dr. Manhattan. When they finally activate their device to transfer his power into Joseph Keene Jr., it instead teleports them to Lady True, and Joseph Keene Jr. is liquefied.
Yeah, that was funny.
That lets Dr. Manhattan channel his power through like the blood to teleport Looking Glass, Ozymandias, and Laurie Blake to Adrian's Antarctic base of Karnak.
And it's there they're able to use Adrian's squid to essentially destroy Lady True's device that would transfer Dr. Manhattan's power into her.
And that was a horrible way to go.
Yeah.
Like, I just shuddered at the thought of just being, like, pelted by these sharp ice daggers just falling from the sky rapid fire.
Unfortunately, Dr. Manhattan did die, it appears.
But he may have been able to transfer his power in a way that he approved of at the very end through the egg that he left for Angela.
Yeah. It was really touching how he didn't want to be alone at the time of his death, so he didn't teleport Angela away. It was a sad death. I'm hoping he comes back, though.
Before we see Angela eat the egg, Laurie and Looking Glass knock out Adrian and arrest him for his past crimes before they return to civilization in the owl ship. And then the season ends on kind of like this weird kind of whimper in a way. It's Angela going back to her home with her grandfather, with her adopted kids. She eats the egg because she suspects Dr. Manhattan wants to give her his power. The episode ends before we find out. But in a way, it's kind of fitting because the comic ended on a similar note. Like, we didn't know what was going to happen next. Was the guy going to open Rorschach's journal or not?
I liked it, though. I do hope that we get a second season of this and we find out that she does have Dr. Manhattan's powers and uses them to bring Dr. Manhattan back to life.
I hope we don't actually get a second season.
Why?
I hope they leave it off where it is because it's kind of perfect the way they left it off. I think it's kind of assumed that she's going to become the next Dr. Manhattan, but what more story is there to tell?
I guess she saves the world.
I'm just going to assume that regardless, I don't need to see all the problems she encounters doing that. If they do make a sequel to this, I hope it's like in a different medium, just like how this was a different medium from the comic. Mm-hmm. Make it like a video game or something.
That would be cool.
That would be cool.
I guess you need to wait about another 30 years, though, and then see what the primary political crisis is going on in the country and base it off of that.
Yeah, that's a really smart way to do it.
And then video games will all be virtual reality, and we'll get to live the Watchmen experience.
I don't know if I want to go to that world, honestly. I want to observe it. I don't want to live in it. Overall, though, as I mentioned earlier, this was my favorite television show of the year, hands down.
It was amazing.
The way all the pieces just fit together so perfectly between the comic and the show, it surpassed my expectations.
Absolutely. Like I said, it was faithful while still being innovative. Alan Moore, I doubt he'll ever watch this, but I think if he did watch it, he'd be proud of it if he wasn't such an asshole.
You're going to get cursed.
Dude, Alan Moore is not the boogeyman. He's just an old pervert who has good writing ability.
Damn. Overall, the show was really well done. I'm giving it 4.5 stars. I think just because of the fact that you don't get the full story from the show, you kind of have to go to supplemental material for some of the lingering, dangling threads there.
Yeah.
But overall, it's a phenomenal piece of work.
I would also give it 4.5 stars out of 5. It's nearly perfect. I feel bad now that we were kind of getting annoyed by the show and questioning it prior to its release. It just goes to show that you should never really judge something before seeing and experiencing something.
Especially if it's done by Damon Lindelof, because that guy's brilliant.
Yeah, get him on some other superhero stuff for sure.
I think that does it for our review. In our next episode, we will be having our 4th annual Best of DC and Marvel Brothers Awards for all the things we loved and hated in 2019.
Yeah, in regards to Marvel and DC. So we'll be giving out awards for Best Marvel and DC Movie, and Actor, and Actresses, and things like that. It's a lot of fun to do every year.
I think it's pretty much no surprise by this point that Watchmen is definitely getting my award for Best Home Media. But what did you guys think about Watchmen? Reach out to us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to let us know what you thought, or you can email us at dynamicduelpodcast@gmail.com.
And you can find links to all of our social media profiles by visiting our site at dynamicduel.com, where you can also find a link to our merchandise store where we sell a ton of awesome Marvel and DC original artwork on t-shirts and mugs and phone cases and laptop cases.
Yeah, if you ever wanted a Dr. Manhattan shirt, check out our store like today. There's a post-Christmas sale going on. So maybe do it like in 2 days, but definitely check it out.
That does it for this episode, guys. Please share this podcast with your friends and family, subscribe to the show, and rate us or review us if you can.
Special thanks to our executive producers, John Spees and Bodo Winter.
And we'll talk to you guys next week. Happy holidays.
Up, and away.
True believers.